Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 334, The Psychology of Healthy Habits with Dr. Jen Howk.
In this episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talk with Dr. Jen Howk. You may know her from the TrueNorth Health Center. Together, we unwrap the psychology of healthy habits, how to sustain a plant-based lifestyle, and really what we get into is the pleasure trap. We talk about emotional eating. Does it exist? Does it not exist? How making mistakes is part of the process, and why a B+ is just so much better than getting an A. And I'm sure you're all going, what? Why would I want a B+ when I could get an A? But you're going to find out in this episode. The conversation is upbeat, it's fun, and it will help you to understand some of the familiar concepts in a much different way. We really get deep into why we make the choices that we do.
Dr. Jen Howk is an author, a researcher, and a psychology coach. She earned her BA from the University of Washington in Seattle, completed her master's and her PhD at Harvard University. She's from Alaska, all the way from Alaska. But now she calls Santa Rosa, California home, where she works at the TrueNorth Health Center as a lecturer and psychology coach. Her clinical work is rooted in powerful insights and tools from evolutionary psychology, particularly the Esteem Dynamics framework she has developed with Dr. Doug Lisle. Her interests are very wide-ranging. She's especially passionate about helping clients through problems of self-esteem, recovery, addiction, and mastering the pathways of human motivation. Please be sure to share this episode with anyone who's trying to make healthy changes in their lives. Plant-based or not, healthy habits are needed by everyone.
A few weeks ago, we talked about redox signaling molecules and how that is helping people. And when I was in a situation that I could not use food and nutrition to heal, this was something that really helped me, and it really didn't matter what the problem was because this helped my whole body with zero toxicity, and it has been amazing for me and others. If you would like to talk about how it can help you from an inflammation point of view or hormonal point of view or even an athletic point of view, please feel free to email us at info@planttrainers.com and we will hop on the phone with you and give you more information.
And now for a moment of gratitude.
I'm grateful because the other day at lunch, I met some people for lunch, but it wasn't my time to eat. I had already eaten a big breakfast, so I ordered a tea, and the waiter crumpled up the check and wouldn't let me pay. And I'm very grateful for my tea.
Well, that's beautiful.
Doubled his tip.
I'm grateful for the interactions I've been having on social media with some of our listeners, knowing that there are people out there that this podcast is affecting in a positive way. I'm just grateful for the feedback we get.
Dr. Jennifer Howk, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers Podcast today.
Yes, it is a great pleasure to be here. I'm very, very glad to be talking to you guys. It's great.
We would love to know if you have a moment of gratitude to share.
I have well, I'm grateful to be here, grateful to be getting out this, very important evolutionary psychology wisdom to the great masses. But I'm particularly grateful. People may know that it's fire season in California, and Sonoma County in particular, where I live near Santa Rosa, is largely evacuated over the last couple of weeks. And it's just been a tremendous ordeal for everybody there. And I was traveling through most of it and missed the worst of it. But I'm just very grateful that these amazing firefighters have contained mostly what they were working to contain, and that we have resources for that, and that I'm okay, my dog's okay, and all the people and animals that I know and love are made it through this time. So it's very scary stuff, but I'm very, very grateful for that. So, yeah.
Well, we're happy you're safe, and we're sending
positive vibes and good feels all the way to the people that need it out there. Absolutely.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. We'll pass on the vibes.
Pass on the vibes. So when did you first get the vibe for plant-based living?
I got the vibe for plant-based living probably when I was about 12 years old, and I went to the Alaska State Fair, and I had like a little Lisa Simpson moment where I associated the hamburger on the plate with the cows that I had just been hanging out with in the petting zoo. It was like a classic, little girl conversion story. And I remember really, I probably wasn't even that old. I think I was about 10. And my dad was really upset that I didn't want to eat the burger, but I was like, no, this does not compute, does not work. So I was 10, so you can only be as compliant as you can be when you're under your parents' roof and subject to the food that's around. But I definitely considered myself vegetarian adjacent pretty much from that point forward. And then started to seriously consider veganism, learned more and more about it. When I got to college, started meeting actual real live vegans, which I had never met in Alaska before. Really kind of thought it was a crazy fringe thing. And, but started to meet some, and they seemed to be like functional, and, they weren't 40 pounds, and they were like doing okay in the world. And just started to get educated and learning more, but still felt that was a little too extreme, and just wasn't sure about all of that. And then, of course, read the China study, because I was starting to become more and more aware of some of the ethical implications of vegetarianism versus veganism. So I spent a lot of years in the dark thinking, oh, vegetarian is fine. You don't have to go all the way to the extremes because there's no animal suffering for dairy and eggs. And just started putting it together. It was a really long-term iterative process, but it started with the ethics and actually like feminist issues around dairy in particular. And then read the China study. And when the China study came out, which I want to say it was like 2006, something like that, I was embedded enough in sort of the ethical world. Vegan cupcakes take over the world had come out around that time. So, you have vegan cupcake recipes, and it was just, I sort of began to integrate the scientific side with the ethical side. And then it's over. And I was also studying climate change and climate science and becoming aware of all the environmental implications. And there was, at some point, it wasn't even a decision. The cost-benefit analysis was overwhelming on making the change. So it's a long answer to a simple question.
Do you remember that defining moment?
I remember reading the China study and my eyes growing wide like saucers as I read about, turning cancer on and off with animal protein and how literally it's that direct. And then I was like, oh, I can't ignore this. So that was probably, I was probably sitting somewhere in Cambridge in 2006 reading that book and having this, all right, it's done. And it cost me relationships at the time. I mean, 2006, people who haven't been plant-based for a long time don't realize how much the world has really changed since even that time. The vegan cheeses that were available were really crap. It just wasn't mainstream. It was really still very much a fringe movement, even that late. But that's around the time that it started to change with, the reach of the internet and social media in particular, and the China study, and then forks over knives, and really this kind of growing movement that started right to crest right around that time. So it was fun to be a part of that early process. I remember there were like 3 internet boards that you could go to. There were Vegan Freaks. For anyone who was around like really back in the day, Vegan Freaks was great. They went, no one knows what happened to them. They were Canadian, I believe. And then the plant-based, like the kitchen, the vegan cupcake kitchen, and just a couple of others. So we were early, but we were vigorous.
So even, I'm thinking like even back in 2010, 2011, when Forks Over Knives just came out, it wasn't a huge, big community like it is right now. Plant-based has grown so much in the last even 8 years, I want to say. And I think it's really just starting to kick in to mainstream society, especially with the release of the Game Changers. I think that's a big move that's going to impact a lot of people, like we've talked about before on the show. But the thing that I'm curious about is you've come to it through an ethical point of view. We've come through it through a health point of view. There's people that come to veganism through an environmental point of view. I wonder, are our brains wired a certain way to come at this from a certain perspective? Are our personalities of the people that are coming at it from each different avenue so different that we're all leaning in from different angles?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing about plant-based in general and whole food plant-based in particular, so, you want to kind of be precise about your terms here. There are very different health implications for someone who just identifies as vegan because, Oreos and Fritos and beer and vegan pizza is not a healthy diet.
Fritos are vegan?
Fritos are totally vegan.
Oh, dude, don't tell me that.
Yeah, there are a lot of conventional junk foods that are vegan, and that was all that I remember discovering all of that and being like, oh my God, this is much easier than I thought it was. But those people, if you're eating that kind of vegan diet, you're going to face all of the health consequences that you would with the standard American diet. Perhaps even worse consequences because it's a highly processed. You're really it would be better from a purely health perspective to eat an ancestral diet that includes some animal products along with some of the vegan processed products than just all vegan processed products. So yeah, I think. The thing to understand about human psychology is that everything we do, literally everything we do, every decision we make, every way that we process information and decide what we're going to do and how we're going to act on that information, and especially when it comes to making a huge life change like shifting to a plant-based diet, is the result of a cost-benefit analysis on that situation. And the cost-benefit analysis for any individual is being filtered through their experiences and through their personality. So people don't really give personality much weight in this sort of discussion, but who you are as a person is very fixed. It's actually fixed genetically from birth. We have vast information on this from behavioral genetics. And so we need to really confront who we are very squarely and accept our personalities and then understand how our personality really, really controls how we see the world and therefore how we run the cost-benefit analysis on any given decision and any new piece of information. So for someone with a certain personality or a certain set of incentives for anything, maybe someone wants to lose weight or someone wants to deal with some other health issue or someone, it could be anything that's driving the motivation externally, is going to mingle with those core personality characteristics to produce a result when they hear about what would be required to switch to plant-based. So for some people, they value the fitness goals more. So watching Game Changers is going to give the bell over the head more than somebody who's dealing with heart disease, where if they sit down and watch Forks Over Knives, they get overwhelmed by the science and data behind that, where that would not matter to someone who is primarily concerned with fitness goals. So it's just all about having as much information out there in as many different formats as possible to basically awaken the cost-benefit analysis for any particular individual and wherever they might be in their motivational matrix with regards to the problem.
So people with the similar personalities, when they find the value that speaks to them, they're willing to make that change. But what about the people who are not willing to make the change like that, those different personalities? Or what's the difference between somebody who sticks with it and doesn't stick with it?
So the main difference between someone who sticks with it and doesn't stick with it is one of the big 5 personality characteristics that we call conscientiousness. So we can, the way that we think in evolutionary psychology about personality and how to describe personality is 5 big characteristics. We call them the big 5. And they are, just really briefly, we can talk about this more if you want, but they are how open you are to experience. So sort of how adventurous you are, how willing you are to do things differently. So you have to be kind of open to even think about making that sort of shift to begin with, but not too open. You don't want to be so open that you're then going to just run off to the next thing. But the main thing, the other 4 are conscientiousness. So that's essentially how much of a perfectionist you are, how diligent you are about getting things done and sticking to a plan, and also how extroverted you are. That's number 3 on the big 5. And then agreeableness is number 4. So how cooperative you are, how agreeable, how easygoing you are. And finally, the 5th big characteristic is emotional stability. So that's like how volatile you are. So people who are very unstable are much more likely to be celebrating with food and medicating with food. So you can start to see already just with this very very brief little overview, how where you are on those dimensions is going to have everything to do with how successful you are on any diet. So conscientiousness is king. So if you're super conscientious, any diet is going to be easier for you because you inherently care. You were a person who is more invested in doing things correctly. So it's easier for you to stick to a plan, to stick to the rules, to follow through on things. Someone who is not very conscientious at all, someone we might call kind of flaky, is just not. It's just much harder for them. And there are, the plant-based movement has a little bit of resistance around this idea that there may be people in the world, and there almost certainly are people in the world who are kind of beyond the reach of being successful, because there are people on these bell curves of personality who are extremely low conscientious, very unstable emotionally. These are people who, they may hear the message and be motivated to act on the message, but in practical terms, confronting the problems in their lives and trying to make these changes, they're at war with their internal personality characteristics and who it is that they are. So those are people who, if they want to be successful, they need to think really hard and really in great detail about how to re-engineer their environment to compensate for those personality differences that make this much more difficult for them.
So it's not an assumed fail. It's just that they need to work harder and pull in more resources to be able to make it.
I would never fully assume a fail. It's a probabilistic process where someone is much more likely to fail, but that doesn't mean that certainly if you handcuff them to a room at TrueNorth Health Center and gave them the food that we give people at TrueNorth and water fasted them, it's going to be successful for them. But some people, based on their inherent personality characteristics, might require that kind of environment to be successful. And so there are trade-offs between free will and happiness and the kind of life that people would want to exist, and then how draconian you have to make the environment to achieve those goals for people.
So have you become very good at predicting how long somebody will continue to follow protocol once they leave TrueNorth and go home?
You can make more or less pretty accurate estimates. You know who's going to struggle more and who's going to struggle less. But the thing is, it's not being driven completely by personality. It's also driven by motivation. So if someone is really facing down a major health crisis, or someone's very overweight and that's really starting to affect their esteem processes, and they're not getting the kind of feedback in the romantic realm or in the friendship realm, or they're being judged at work and they're very motivated to change for that reason, all of that calculates in. So you have to account for very high motivation and how that's interacting with personality. But if you know enough about somebody, you can definitely you can make a fairly good estimate. But of course, people surprise you all the time. So
what if the motivation is there for someone to make a change, but they don't have the real will to actually follow through with it? Like, they want to make the change, but they always come up with the excuse, or maybe now's not the best time, or it's not for, I don't know if I can go through with it.
Or I know I have to.
But like, how do you deal with those kind of people?
Those people are running their cost-benefit analysis on the problem, and we really you get to a point when you understand cost-benefit analysis and how cost-benefit analysis is never wrong. We are very accurate animals who are running that CB all the time on everything, and it's never widely irrational. It just might look irrational to somebody else, but for that individual who is making that largely unconscious cost-benefit decision on any given problem, it is completely rational to who it is that they are. So if they're a very emotionally unstable, low conscientious person, it is more rational for them to not be compliant internally. Like that all lines up with who it is that they are. But you look at that and you say, hey, it looks like you want to make this change. Like, what's the problem? Why can't you follow through? The other huge piece of this, of course, that we're not really talking about is that everybody is up against, this is an unfair battle with the pleasure trap. So we are living in a modern food environment that we never adapted to solve. This is a super normal food environment that we genetically are just not equipped to battle. And so everybody, no matter how conscientious and how stable and how diligent and how motivated, the pleasure trap is an unfair fight. You are fighting millions of years of your own evolution that adapted adapted to solve a different problem, solve a problem of scarcity, essentially, of starvation. And now we live in a context of insane abundance, and it's a complete mismatch between who we are genetically and what kind of environment we're facing in the modern world. So that it doesn't really. Personality matters hugely, but the pleasure trap is, personality only gets you so far against a supernormal stimuli. And for some people, the pleasure trap is equivalent to cocaine. It's equivalent to an alcoholic who has their first drink. I mean, these are forms of the pleasure trap. Alcohol and drugs are related to the pleasure trap. So it's situation normal to be defeated by this thing. It takes extraordinary ability and motivation to overcome it.
It's almost worse because when you're walking down the grocery aisle or when you're driving, just like a quarter of a mile in the car, you see all of these products and all of these companies that are right in your face where you don't necessarily see cocaine right in your face every 3 minutes. But we've talked about the pleasure trap before on the Plant Trainers podcast, but for those people who have heard of it, but maybe haven't talked about it in full or read the book, can you just give us a basic synopsis and an understanding of what this is?
Yeah, it's just a bit like I just said. It's the idea that there is a mismatch between who we are genetically and the problems that we adapted genetically to solve in our ancestral history and the modern environment. So we're very interested in evolutionary psychology in that difference. So we exquisitely adapted to solve certain problems that faced us in the realm of survival and reproduction in the Stone Age. That's what we are. We are still Stone Age creatures. We have Stone Age bodies and Stone Age minds. We have not changed in that regard since the Stone Age. And so we are maximally perfectly adapted to that environment. But obviously the modern environment is very different from that environment. And what killed more of our ancestors than any other problem was starvation. So we are on a bell curve across the population, some people more than others. We are extremely well adapted to solving the problem of scarcity and fending off starvation by seeking out and being extremely motivated to seek out the highest calorie-dense food in the environment, and then to hold on to those calories and hold on to that weight as efficiently as possible, because we faced great periods of profound scarcity that was extremely dangerous for our survival and reproduction goals. So the pleasure trap is the idea that we are these Stone Age creatures with these Stone Age bodies and Stone Age brains who, we're lucky to find calorie-dense sources in our ancestral history, and now they're everywhere we look. And we have brains that are absolutely locked in on, we have to cram it. We feel completely compelled to eat as much and as often of that extremely calorie-dense food as we can. And it is all on a bell curve. So some people can get away with that more than others, but we know that the genetic correlation with obesity and propensity to the pleasure trap and putting on and keeping on weight falls on a bell curve. So some people are in much bigger trouble with this problem than others. It's not that the skinny people that you see walking around in the mall are necessarily more compliant with a healthy diet. They almost certainly aren't. Everybody out there is eating more or less the same standard American diet, but some people that's going to be more visible on them, and it's going to lead to more health consequences than other people.
Is there an easy way for people to get out of that trap?
There is not.
Build a tree house in Costa Rica and live off the tree.
That's one way to do it. Yeah, I mean, this trap cannot be underestimated. This is the trap of the modern environment, and it has most people ensnared in it, if not everybody. The only way out is through. The only way out is essentially white knuckling your way through the unpleasantness initially of a whole food plant-based diet, or just a whole ancestral diet in general. For people who are not willing to let go of animal food, it's still, from a health perspective, a better strategy to just go to something that looks like a paleo diet. This is why people will see great shifts there. But just like any other drug withdrawal process, you can think of this as a low-level addictive process. There's a period of great unpleasantness when people shift from an extremely calorie-rich standard American diet to a whole food plant-based diet. It feels their genes are screaming at them that they're doing the wrong thing. That's the message that their brain is receiving, and they are highly motivated, just like someone who you just took off of cocaine or heroin would be highly motivated to go source more in the environment and feel like they were being acutely deprived. You have to get through that period, and that is part of where personality comes in, and environment hugely comes in. So how well you've controlled your environment and your food environment, how accessible the hypernormal stimuli is to you, that all of these things are going to contribute to your success, just like they would if you were an alcoholic who was trying to get sober. If you're working as a bartender, it's going to be a lot harder to get sober than it is if you take yourself into rehab for 28 days. So we have to think about this problem in the same way. How are you engineering your environment for confronting the fact that you're going to be going through an initial withdrawal process that's going to be very uncomfortable, and you're going to be the experience that you have in your mind is that you're doing the wrong thing. Your body and your mind are screaming at you, you're doing the wrong thing, you're doing the wrong thing, and you're fighting millions of adapted years to do that. We talk very often about the infamous rat study where they had these rats. You guys may have heard this story before, where a group of rats were fed normal rat chow, and they were normal, healthy rats eating their rat chow. And then the researchers took the rat chow away and replaced it with essentially hyper-normal standard American diet type food. And the rats gained a predictable amount of weight, gained about like 50% of their weight. It just started to develop all of the symptoms associated with the standard American diet, really enjoyed the hyper-normal food. And then the researchers took it away and put back the normal rat chow. And those rats fasted. They went on strike for an average of 2 weeks before they would go back to the regular rat chow, because they were running the cost-benefit analysis on whether they wanted to waste that precious room in their stomachs on the normal rat chow when they were pretty sure more of the good stuff was going to be coming on its way, because they had been enjoying it and eating it for several weeks at that point. So it took them a couple of weeks, and they had to get to a point where they'd lost enough weight, and then the cost-benefit analysis started to turn around, and they're like, well, I guess I better eat the rat chow. So this is the same exact process that human brains go through, where you take away someone's junk food and someone's fast food, and you give them oatmeal and kale salad, and they're like, are you kidding? Like, I'd rather eat cardboard. You'll hear people literally say things like that. And it's because they have not, the cost benefit has not yet shifted. They're not feeling enough of the pain or enough of the benefit from the diet. So it's a very mechanical process.
There's so much more great information coming your way, but before we get to that, we wanted to give an extra shout out to tell you we appreciate how much you care. Because of your contributions, no matter how big or small, you've helped us to cover hosting and production costs, as well as give a bright young intern a chance to work with our compassionate company. For those of you who want to help support the show, support learning opportunities for young plant-based students and compassionate causes, you can do so at patreon.com/planttrainers or click the link in the show notes. And now back to the show.
Or how many times have you skipped lunch knowing that you're going to an all-you-can-eat sushi place or Doomies for dinner because you want to get every little last ounce out of dinner, and you've gone and skipped your good healthy lunch that you would have otherwise completely enjoyed?
Absolutely. And you want to maximize the pleasure of that experience. So you want to go in a little hungry, it's like all these calculations that we make. How often have you been out to dinner and you're having pizza and a salad? How motivated are you to eat that salad before you have a bite of the pizza? Not very motivated.
Well, the pizza will be cold, so it doesn't make sense, right?
And that's just science.
For sure.
We can tell the difference. We can tell the difference between 1% more calorie dense food, and we will be much more motivated, because don't waste the time and energy on something that's just going to take up room with fiber and water in your stomach when you could be harvesting greater calories from that food source. The correct thing to do in an environment of profound scarcity in our ancestral history was eat the calorie dense thing first. Watch your dogs, watch your cats. Give them regular kibble and then give them canned food, and watch and see what they eat first. They will never fail to eat the more calorie dense food first. And we have this idea that we are some sort of species that has transcended this problem through bigger brains or some sort of special species analysis, but we're not. We're just souped up chimps, and we are just as susceptible to all of these problems as any other animal in the animal kingdom.
For sure. And we actually just got yesterday or the day before at our Instagram at Plant Trainers, got a DM saying that she was on day 2 of eating whole food plant-based, and she was experiencing some physiological and psychological things that have come up. And is this normal? And you very often detox. Now, whether you're going to detox physically or not, that is not, I don't even find that 50-50 so much, but detoxing emotionally is huge. And your body's in this conflict exactly like these rats, like, what's going on? Like, I want the good stuff. So we definitely see it with some of our clients or some of our listeners who write in and say, this is what I'm going through. Please tell me I'm normal.
Sure. I mean, it's you are going to have, I mean, there's going to be some legitimate actual physiological detox process going on depending on how much crap you've been eating. Mm-hmm. And there's also the process of just that you're running this whole new CV. You're coming to terms with the fact that this extremely pleasurable source of dopamine and endorphin that you were getting from this really rich diet has been taken away from you. So you were feeling the same kind of withdrawal symptoms that you would feel, not only if you were coming off a drug, but, think about when you've been dumped and how likely you are to text your ex. It's like it's bad for you. That's not a good strategy. But the process in the brain is that you just had that dopamine was just linked to that. You just had that source of really good feelings. And the thing with these brain chemicals is that those are the cues in our brains to let us know that we're on the right track for our survival and reproduction. That's why they're in there. Dopamine in particular is associated mostly with food and sex. And those are the things that ensure the survival and reproduction of the species, nothing more important. So when we get dopamine cues, that's letting us know you're doing the right thing for either survival and or reproduction. So when we get super flooded hits of the powerful brain chemicals that are linked to those survival cues, of course we're going to want more of them, and you take them away and they were just here and you just had them from the almond butter that's still in the cupboard. There's no way you're not getting in there with a spoon. You can't rely on your willpower to get through this problem. You got to get it out of your environment.
You said food, sex, and it just reminded me of Dr. Lyle and Forks Over Knives, food, sex, and I would have said sex, food, and just...
No.
Sorry.
Thanks.
We could really shut down the whole discussion here and just say that it really all comes down to food and sex. It really is. We have this notion of ourselves as some kind of elevated, we've transcended this kind of thing, but that's what motivates everything. We're chasing those cues because that's what's communicating the whole purpose of life is a little different than the meaning of life. And that's perhaps a bigger existential conversation for another time. But the purpose of life is not mysterious at all. It is to successfully get our DNA into the next generation. That is what motivates every species on planet Earth. And so the main way that we know that we're on track with that is things like dopamine cues. And so when we start to hijack that process with super normal food that didn't exist in the Stone Age, I mean, we're dealing with thousands of calories per pound in something like a peanut butter sandwich compared to 300 calories per pound in fruit or starches. It's not a fair fight. We've absolutely overloaded the system with something it's not prepared to take on.
It's also what we enjoy as entertainment. I bet if you broke down the television, you'd see that people are watching the cooking channels, The Bachelor, and porn. Yeah. Those are probably the 3 most watched things.
Food and sex.
Food and sex.
Yes, it's really true. It's amazing to me at TrueNorth how many fasters get obsessed with the cooking channels. Like it doesn't torture them. They just really like to watch them. I've seen it happen over and over again.
Oh, I did a 5-day water fast, and Instagram was not my best friend.
No,
there was way too much food. There was way too much.
From my psychology, I need to just pretend food doesn't even exist. So, but people are different, individual differences.
So people are very hesitant to make these changes, but then once they do you notice that their taste buds start to change after a certain amount of time? And do they start craving the foods? Like, I know when I talk to my students about me transitioning to a plant-based lifestyle, their first question is always, but don't you miss steak or don't you miss meat? Like, when was the last time you have it? And I don't miss that stuff at all, because plant-based food to me is beautiful food and it tastes fantastic. So is there a certain amount of time that it takes people in general to adapt?
Yeah, it is. It's an extinction process, just like there is with any addictive substance. So there is no way that there would be anyone in the world out there who could maintain years of sobriety from alcohol if they felt the same kind of withdrawal rage that you feel in the first couple of weeks. They would just never make it through that process. So it quiets down over time. So I'm 6 years sober from alcohol myself, and I don't have alcohol cravings. It doesn't happen. The only time anything like that even would float across my consciousness would be if I put myself in an environment with a lot of cues, like the exact same bar that I had been in before. There was a very specific situation or smell or something like that. So, and that the same thing will happen with people with food. So if they're in a good groove and they've gotten themselves through the month or two that it really takes to start to neuroadapt and they have enough resources and they've figured out how to make competitively pleasurable food that is whole food, plant-based. And people will go to really extensive lengths with this, with fancy recipes and everything else to try to compensate for that. But it doesn't have to be that complicated, and that can be a little bit of a trap for people. But if they have a couple of basic things that they can make reliably and that are easy enough to make, or that they can get from one of these companies that now provides this sort of thing, and they start to go through that process, they're not going to be feeling the acute withdrawal and the acute cravings. But that's hard to anticipate when you're in the middle of that initial acute, oh my God, it was just here. Where did it go? I got to get it back. Whole Foods is 2 miles away.
At the beginning, when you were talking about the big five, you mentioned briefly self-esteem. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering where that plays into that, bar in terms of people's personalities, because you might be born with your big five and where you are on that curve, but self-esteem is something that you get from your environment. You're not necessarily born with. So how does that fit in?
Yeah, self-esteem sits outside of the personality matrix. So self-esteem is essentially your self-evaluation of what kind of progress you're making toward the goals that you have in your life. And this is something that only you can control. Nobody else can touch your self-esteem process, and you control that lever. And it's a very subtle process where what we call the internal audience, which is, you can think of like a little committee that lives inside of your head, is watching your behavior. It knows that there is some amount of distance that you need to travel from where you are to where you would want to be to get better esteem feedback from the quote unquote Stone Age village, which is the main thing that we're looking for. We're looking for signals of value and belonging from the people in the Stone Age village that we would want to get those signals from. Because again, in the Stone Age, you are hosed if you're on your own. You need other people to protect you and to keep you alive and to keep you fed, and you're absolutely reliant on other people. So we're very attuned, and anyone who's been to high school knows that you're attuned to signals from other people about how valuable you are. And so that's external esteem. And the goals that we have are almost always related to some estimate of what kind of external esteem we're going to receive if we make a change. So if I lose 100 pounds, I'm going to get better feedback from the Stone Age village about how valuable I am and how worthwhile I am. And that's going to feel good. So that's where that motivation comes from. But the self-esteem is the process of the internal audience watching your progress toward that goal. It actually doesn't really particularly care if you're successful or not. Obviously, if you're successful, you're going to get the external feedback. That's going to be very powerful. It's going to feel really good. And your internal audience will be pleased with that. But your internal audience is primarily concerned with the process. It's process over outcome. If people don't remember anything else from all of my yammering today, that's the main thing. The process over outcome is the most important key to self-esteem, and really self-esteem is the key to human happiness. It really is. And the self-esteem process is writ large in this plant-based effort, because if you are addressing the fundamentals that get you to the goals that you would have with a whole food plant-based diet. So you were diligently eating starch-based meals every day, and you were staying on track with those goals, and you were watching yourself make very gradual progress. Even if you're slipping up from time to time, you are still going back to the fundamentals and making steady progress. You will initiate this feeling with the self-esteem process that we very often will call pride. That's the name that we have for it. But what that feeling really is the self-esteem process giving you positive feedback for staying on track to making a big change and a big goal in your life.
If you're the type of person that relies more on external feedback than internal feedback, can you do something to switch that?
we all are that kind of person. Everybody is the kind of person that relies more on external feedback, because external feedback is much more powerful in terms of its cue for our survival and reproduction than the internal voice. So this is hard for everybody to switch their compass to the voice of the internal audience and the self-esteem process away from the external feedback. But it is a process that's something that everybody needs to do if they really want to tap into a wellspring of stable, abundant happiness and well-being for themselves. But it is going to be a little bigger of a shift for some people than others. If you're very emotionally unstable, for example, that you're going to be more attuned to the external signals. There are lots of different things that could drive that. And it's also context dependent on the goal. So certain goals, you're happier to be in a very quiet self-esteem process around those than you would be with another goal where you would want some kind of external validity. But everybody is facing that dichotomy in some sense.
You mentioned emotional, and I know that you have some views on emotional eating, but does that mean that if you're not strong enough in your own personal feedback and you're relying on other people's, that you're more likely to be an emotional eater? And I know you have your views on emotional eating, so let's get into that a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, emotional eating is really, again, just kind of it's a reflection of a cost-benefit analysis. So the main thing that people need to be doing is reducing the points of failure in their plan. If they're trying to make a big change and they're trying to essentially go to war against their own genes, which is what people are doing when they're moving to a whole food plant-based diet, you're going to have more success by reducing the choice points in your day. So you cannot rely on yourself to have the willpower and the discernment and the capacity to quote unquote make good choices. That's a disaster waiting to happen. If you're like, you wake up in the morning and you're like, well, I've got goals and I'm going to do a whole food plant-based diet. Most people, some extreme personalities, Alan Goldhammer is one. If people have met Dr. Goldhammer, he doesn't have a problem with what we call emotional eating because he's so on track. Yes. So some people are like this.
Whole food plant-based overnight. Yeah.
Some people hear the good word, they hear the Sermon on the Mount, and they're just done, like no problem. But the rest of us mere mortals, it's a matter of engineering the environment and reducing those points of failure with the decision making, because decision making is taxing. You're asking yourself to run the cost benefit again on a super normal stimuli, and eventually that's going to collapse. So when we engage in what we would call emotional eating, that is essentially you have not gotten your environment predictable and consistent enough, and you've led yourself into a situation where you're forcing yourself to make an unfair choice between hyper calorie dense food and either no backup plan or a far less attractive backup plan. So the ways to fix that are to always have very attractive, very competitively pleasurable whole food plant-based food on hand. So if you don't like to cook or this is a big stress to you, then you need to work a little harder to maybe hire somebody to cook for you, or order from one of these companies that makes this kind of food, or figure out things that you can prep ahead of time. You have to work with your own personal psychology and your own personal limitations to essentially not even give yourself the opportunity to be sitting there feeling the struggle and feeling like, what am I going to do? I know I should do this thing, but this other option is over here. So you just want to have it lined up as well as possible to not even get yourself into that situation, because you could call it emotional eating in the sense that if you've been taken out of the deep groove, you're more likely to go pursue the high calorie dense food because it's a bigger hit to your survival and reproduction cues. But you're always going to do that if you have the choice. You always are going to pursue you're going to maximize your time and energy. This is what we're just built to do. So some people, if you're much more prone to emotional eating, you need to just lock down your environment all that much more. People who don't have that kind of volatility, they can get away with it. But if you're a mere mortal, you really need to be careful.
There's some people who do very well most of the time, and then their spouse leaves to go on a vacation or something like that, and that's when they need to work a lot harder at making sure that they're still making good decisions. But then you also have people who, me aside, there's people who they will drown their sorrows in high calorie food, but they will also have a victory and celebrate with high calorie food. And it's almost like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Yep. Celebrate and medicate. And this is again, you're staying in the addictive process. If you haven't gotten yourself, if you haven't given yourself the gift of really fully withdrawing from the crap food, you don't actually know. You don't know how capable you are because you're still in the addictive process. So you don't know if you can live sober unless you've gotten sober for some amount of time to quiet down those cravings enough that you can actually start running that cost benefit on things. So people will feel sometimes, I'll talk to people they feel like they just can't get it together. They just can't stay on track, but they might need to just go put themselves in jail at TrueNorth or the McDougall program or find some way of like really white knuckling through a month or two and getting through the initial acute misery to the point where the craving gets quiet enough that the whole thing just gets way easier. And as long as you're maintaining a situation where you're not being bombarded by options every day, a lot of people can find some success where they would not if they were in the wrong environment. And the other thing here is that people get obsessed with perfectionism, and that's absolutely the wrong way to think about it. You want to be getting essentially a B+ on this, generally speaking, instead of shooting for an A+ and then relapsing and then having to claw your way back out and then relapsing again. That's not the right way to do this. It's a lot more stress on the body. It's a lot more stress on the mind. It's a lot more stress on the self-esteem process. It's much better to just aim for doing a very good job most of the time. And when you make a mistake and you have a slip and you eat something that maybe you wouldn't have wanted to, then you just get right back on track, and your esteem process, your self-esteem process, and your internal audience will work with you on that.
I like that.
There's no question that creating change or changing habits is a difficult and challenging task for everybody. I mean, it depends what we're talking about, but all around it's difficult. And I think that I'd like to give you an opportunity to explain to our audience what happens at TrueNorth and who goes to TrueNorth and what's the reason that they're going there, just in case there are listeners that might benefit from that. So if you could just tell us about it, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think there is many reasons motivating people who come to TrueNorth as there are patients. We have people who are everywhere from just kind of wanting to do a reset. A lot of people come in and just kind of, they don't even necessarily fast. They just eat the food, which is all, of course, we call it SOS free, for salt, oil, sugar free, whole food, plant-based, with an emphasis on eating your non-starchy veggies first, your salad and your steamed veggies, and then having sort of a starch-based McDougall type diet as the main calorie source. So there are people who are just kind of coming in to just do a quick little reset. Some people are just doing a little maintenance fast. They'll come in and do, a 5-day or a 3 or 5 day fast, just on a periodic basis, and they're not dealing with any major health issues. And then you go all the way up to people who have hundreds of pounds to lose, or they're dealing with major health crises, and they've kind of run out of other options in conventional medicine. And TrueNorth is really a last effort for them to try to address these issues. So it's welcome to all people. Everyone's going to benefit. It's relative to where you are and what you're dealing with, but it's a good, fasting is a very powerful modality for addressing all kinds of pathologies. And sometimes people will come in and fast, and you don't even know the wisdom of the body and what a short or medium term fast might be addressing behind the scenes that you haven't even seen present itself symptomatically yet. So it's a good practice for people to just kind of get in the mindset of periodically fasting. It doesn't have to be a big, extreme, crazy thing, but this again is mimicking our ancestral history, where it's almost certain that all of us would have gone through some period during the year where we would have been in a situation of pretty profound scarcity. So we're exquisitely adapted to solve that problem, and it seems to carry additional benefits, which we're just starting to discover.
So everybody has a doctor that works with them, so they don't have to worry about any low blood pressure or anything like that while they're fasting.
They're getting their vitals checked every day. There's a team of doctors and interns who are rounding on them twice a day. And then they have a primary physician that they have periodic visits with, and they do lab work with to keep an eye on them. And nobody's approved for fasting unless they're meeting all of those credentials on admission too. So which can be frustrating for people, because sometimes people will, make the trek out there and be expecting to go on some big 3 or 4 week fast. But their markers are just not at a place where it would be safe. So, We never fast people who are not approved to be fasted. But the good news there is that you can see enormous improvements in all kinds of health measures just by getting really, really dialed in on the diet for some amount of time, because that's something that very few people, even if they are eating a very healthy diet, they're not eating a TrueNorth diet. They don't really have it in that clean a form, and to just kind of be in a situation where that's all you can eat. You can't go off plan even if you wanted to, unless you escape the jail. So, which people will do. You'll sometimes see patients down the road at the store getting Haagen-Dazs. I've seen that.
Shame.
It's the pleasure trap. There is no shame. There's no shame in the pleasure trap.
Well, no, okay, fine. That's not what I meant, but yes.
No, I know it's not what you meant, but it's
it's just a pity that they're putting all this effort and finances and everything to make the trip, and then
absolutely
they're still programmed to sabotage. Yeah,
change is hard.
That shows you the power of the pleasure trap. I mean, really, people cannot underestimate this thing. It is relentless. It is relentless. And it is no surprise that the vast majority of people in the developed world are in it. Like it is unusual, really super unusual to be able to get out of it. So, and those of us in the plant-based movement who have managed to get out of it, or mostly out of it, need to be aware that we have what we call in evolutionary psychology egocentric bias about that, which means that you and your personality you were probably more conscientious, and you were just more capable of taking on this problem than a lot of other people in the population. And so keeping that in mind, that you're dealing with, people who are successful in the whole food plant-based world are 90th percentile plus conscientiousness invariably, just by definition, almost. Certainly the sort of the thought leaders in the movement absolutely are. And so they're looking at the rest of the population being like, well, what's the problem? You just need to make the change, and it's delicious food, and what's the deal? Not realizing that 90% of the rest of the population is less conscientious than they are. And it is massively harder for those people to run that analysis on the problem and make the same kinds of decisions that you did. So just having great kindness and compassion and patience, and just presenting the information and letting people run their own cost benefit and their own and come to a process with it. And there is a learning process too. We have a saying in 12-step that I always was a little baffled by, called relapse is part of recovery. And I would hear this and be like, well, what does that even mean? And it's the idea that you're informing the little file system in your brain about the actual costs associated with doing the wrong thing, essentially. And so I've had this experience completely where, I've been vegan for ethical reasons, junk food vegan for many years, and slowly moving into the whole food plant-based movement and kind of tightening those screws as I went and trying to get it dialed in a better way. But that's been a long, long process. And it's only been in the last year or so that the cost benefit analysis on, for example, eating some crap when I'm traveling, that was one of the last things to go. So like you were saying earlier, when you, hypothetical people have hypothetical spouses go out of town, that little circuit would go off in my head when I was traveling. I'd be alone at the airport, and it's like, oh, it's vegan nacho time, or whatever the drug of choice was. And so there has to be a certain number of times that you do that, and then you pay the cost the next day. So I've become very salt sensitive. I've become you feel hungover, you feel bad, you feel hungover, you feel bloated, you feel just unpleasant. And then your self-esteem process also takes a big hit. So you're getting a little black mark from your internal audience for the moment. And so that becomes information that gets plugged into the internal computer that lives in our brain, that the next time you're presented with that situation, it's fine-tune that calibration a little bit. So the cost benefit analysis, the cost went up from the last time. Last time the cost was here, then we had a relapse and it felt really crappy. And so now the cost is a little higher. And at some point that tips it over. So the computer spits out a different result and says, actually, it's not worth it. It's not worth your time and energy to go eat that vegan crap at the airport. Just eat the fruit that you brought, So, and I've watched that happen in myself. So it's absolutely, nobody should be expected to get this perfectly right out of the gate. This is a iterative learning process and a lifetime process that people need to have a lot of patience with.
And it's not an easy process, yeah.
You freaks who get it right the first time. Yeah.
Listen, I have my moments too. It's a process. It's not easy for anybody, even for the people like me who do it overnight. it's something that takes a lot of work and dedication, but when you find meaning and value to what you're doing, you're that much more likely to stick to it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Dr. Howk, this has been awesome. The information that you shared, the energy that you gave us, it's really super valuable to us personally and our listeners. We really, really appreciate it. I know that a while ago we had Chef AJ on the show, and every time we see her, she talks so highly of TrueNorth.
Yes.
If you could just share with us where people could connect with TrueNorth or connect with yourself, we'd love to give the audience that opportunity, and thank you.
Yeah, so they can find TrueNorth on the web, healthpromoting.com, or just Google it. You can also find, all kinds of Facebook groups and other Instagram feed. Like look for the hashtag TrueNorth Health Center on Instagram. I always post my food with that hashtag. You can find me in 2 different places. So I share with Dr. Lyle on the esteemdynamics.com website. You can find information about both of us there, book appointments with both of us there, and then I also have my own website where I can book appointments for coaching or anything else at jenhawk.com, and it's HOWK, even though my ridiculous family pronounces it like the bird. So, and then you can follow me on Instagram if you'd like to, which is mostly photos of my dogs and of food. So that's just JW Hawk. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
We'll link to all that in the show notes at planttrainers.com.
Sure.
Yeah.
And thank you again so much for your time and all the work that you're doing.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. It's great to meet you guys and love to talk about all this stuff. So great to meet you.
Thank you all so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers podcast. We want to make sure that you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platform.
We really appreciate the feedback we receive from you every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans. It really helps other people find us just like you did.
Thanks so much to our patrons. To become a patron, visit us at patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference in the quality of the show.
And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is @PlantTrainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at planttrainers.com for awesome recipes, a list of our services, and of course, our latest podcast.
We encourage you to email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so that we can help you improve your quality of life through nutrition and fitness.
So we hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time and have a healthy day. Or is that too corny?
It's a little cheesy.